And I said, so I need somebody to go in there and sign for James Red. And I looked at him and he goes, oh, man, who are you going to get to do that? And I went, well, I was thinking you, Eric. And he goes, me? Oh, I don't know. He goes, well, wait a minute. I can't do that. I go, what do you mean? He goes, you said you're using some scumbag's picture off the Hillsborough County website. You're using some guy's mugshot. They're going to know it's not me. And I go, well, here's the thing, Eric. I said, for James Red, I used the photo of you when you were arrested for domestic violence, when you slapped around your ex-wife and got arrested. You know how that's online. So I used that picture. So you are James Red. He goes, motherfucker. Hey, this is Matt Cox, and I'm going over my story. I've been over this story several times on Concrete and Valuetainment, Soft White Underbelly, different YouTube channels. It's my personal story, and I'm kind of breaking it into segments and going over it. So if you're watching this is the third part. You should go back and watch part 1 and 2, and this is 3. And it's basically, we're going to cover right now. I'm caught up to the point where I was placed on probation for committing really what I considered a minor fraud. So I got I ended up with 3 years federal probation, and I was on probation, and but I was basically barely getting by on the money that I was making, and I ended up with I had the kind of the train of thought that was, I'm now already a criminal, so I might as well start being a criminal, acting more like a criminal. Like before, I felt like I was doing fraud, but it was fraud for customers to get them into property so I could make large commissions. And what year was it? So this is 2002. So by now it's 2000. It's like mid 2002, and I was early 2002, mid 20, whatever, first part of, let's say 2002. And what I did was I decided I was going to open up a development company with a bunch of some of the other guys that I knew, some real estate agents and some business partners, and we were going to open up. But we needed money to do it, and nobody had a significant amount of money to open up a development company. And we wanted to build these new properties in Ybor City, which is like an area of Tampa that was going through revitalization. And what I decided to do was I needed to come up with a scam that was what I considered to be semi-foolproof, so that I could basically steal from the banks and they wouldn't realize they'd been defrauded. So what I did was I decided I was going to start flipping properties to do that. I was going to buy properties cheap, fix them up, sell them, But the problem with that is if you buy properties in a cheap properties in a cheap area, and then you fix them up and you sell them, the problem is those areas don't appraise very high. So I had to figure out how to get that properties to appraise high. And then the other problem is people that buy houses in crappy areas like that, they tend to have credit problems. They have employment problems, they have rental history problems, they have credit problems, they have down payment problems. Like they're a major problem. Like they'll quit their job 4 days before the closing, or they'll go out and spend all the money for their down payment or something. They just do stupid stuff. So they're a problem. And then they have bad credit. That's a problem. So I needed to figure out a way around that. And what I came up with was creating my own borrowers and having those fake borrowers. By the way, the other problem when you fix up a property, the other problem is you spend a lot of money renovating it. So I didn't want to blow money renovating the properties. You buy them for $50. I didn't want to put another $30 in it and then sell it for $120. Or even if I could get it appraised high, sell it for whatever that. Why would I blow $30,000? Why wouldn't I put $5,000 in it? So what fixed all these was creating synthetic identities. So what I did was I figured out how to create synthetic identities by using the social security numbers of kids that really hadn't been born yet. So, or hadn't been fake kids. So, you get Social Security. I convinced Social Security to start issuing me Social Security numbers to children that didn't exist. And this takes place over initially it started where I just got Social Security numbers from kids that were like 3 or 4 years old. Like I went into the file cabinets and found people that were claiming their children on their 1040s, which I had copies of their 1040s. So they'd be like, hey, I have 3 kids. Here's their socials, and I'm claiming them as dependents. So I would go in and get those, like, oh, this kid's 3, this kid's 2, he's 5. I'd get those numbers just to kind of play around. But ultimately what I ended up doing was going to Social Security and convincing Social Security to issue me Social Security numbers for children that had never been born. So I would say, hey, I've got a 10-month-old son, and I'd provide a fake birth certificate and a fake shot record. And I would get them to issue me a Social Security number to a child that doesn't exist. And then I would take that Social Security number and I would go and I'd apply online to a credit card company. Sorry, to a bank that issues credit cards, whatever. And I'd apply, and of course they would deny them. So I'd go online, they'd deny it. But what it would do is when I plugged in, so I'd say the kid was like 30 years old. So this 30-year-old kid, here's his this 30-year-old kid. Here's a 30-year-old man. Here's his Social Security number. Here's his address. Here's his job. And I would apply for a credit card. They would deny it, of course, but they denied it because they didn't know who the person was and he had no credit scores. But it would create a credit profile. And that credit profile would say that this person's name, John Doe, this is his date of birth, this is his social, this is his address, this is where he works. So now that's listed in the credit bureau. I would then turn around and I would apply for credit cards with companies that also ordered secured credit cards. They would then say, you're denied for the Bank of America Platinum Visa, but if you give us $300, we'll give you a secured credit card. So I would do that for this fictitious person, this synthetic identity, and they would send me a credit card. And I started making the payments on those credit cards. After 6 months of keeping the balances below 30% of the available balance on the card, the credit bureaus would generate credit scores. So after 6 months, these people would have credit scores of like 705, 720, 690, 695. Like they were all right around 700. So my borrowers end up with 700 credit scores. My fake borrowers have 700 credit scores. At that time, you only needed a 620 to get a loan. So to get 95% financing, or 80 or 90, whatever you want, to get a loan, on a mortgage, you only needed a 620 or higher. My guys have 700. So what I did was I went into Ybor City and I started buying houses. So the way an appraisal works is this. Say I buy a house in an area let's say I want to buy a house for $60,000. And let's say if you're going to buy a house or refinance a house and you want to borrow money from the bank sends out an appraiser. And that appraiser goes out and he looks at your property. He then looks at the surrounding properties that have sold recently that are the same square footage, that are the same type of house. Like if you have a 2-story triplex, you can't compare it to a single-story, single-family home. I mean, it has to be a single family. It has to be apples to apples. So what happens is these houses in Ybor are selling for $75,000 if they're in good shape. So how do I buy houses for $50,000 that are in bad shape in Ybor, clean them up a little bit, and get them to appraise at $200,000? You need comparable sales, right? So the reason Ybor City at the time was all selling for $75,000 is because all the houses are selling. So there's no comparable sales for anything over $75,000. So I went in and I started buying houses for $50,000 in the name of fake borrowers. My synthetic identities. And we also called them phantom borrowers. So that's what the newspapers started calling them, phantom borrowers. So I would go in and I'd buy a house for $50,000, and I would then go downtown and I would record the value of that home for $200,000. So I would say that this property that I bought for $50 had actually been bought for $200, or whatever, on average, $175, $210, $190. So now you've got one house in Ybor City worth $200,000. That's not enough to borrow against, because as soon as the appraiser comes out, he's going to say, this house is worth you bought it for 200, but all the other comparable sales are worth 75. So what I did was I bought one house for 50 and recorded the value at 190. I bought another house for 50 or 60 and recorded the value at 210. I bought another house for 50,000 and recorded the value at 200. Bought another house, so I started buying houses and recording the value in the name of fake people. And the borrowers were names, like, now there were some other borrower names, like there was a guy named Alan Duncan, there was one named Joel Cologne. So what I very quickly started naming them after characters on Reservoir Dogs. So the movie Reservoir Dogs by Quentin Tarantino. So what happens is I was naming them, like, one of the guys' names was James Red. One was named Lee Black. One's named like Michael White. One is named like David Silver. One was named William Blue. So one was named Brandon Green. So these and they all have credit cards. They all have perfect credit profiles. So they all have 700 credit score plus. Hey, I hope you're enjoying the video. If you're interested in getting a painting done by me, my contact information is in the description box. Enjoy the video. Once I bought the house, recorded the value, I would then clean it up. You know, I'm not putting in new pipes and new electrical. We're just painting, doing very basic painting, trimming the trees, cleaning the front yards, painting the outside of the house, and we're doing a horribly shitty, cheap job. But the appraiser would come in, and he would look at the property, and he'd say, well, it's not a great property, but it's okay. And he'd say, it's in a bad area, but man, there's comparable sales all over the place. Like that house down the street sold for 210. That one sold for 190. That one sold for 195. And I'd say, yeah, I bought this property for 190. How much can you get it appraised for? He'd say, oh, I can get it appraised for like 195. So this property that I bought for $50,000 and put $10,000 into is now worth $195,000. So James Red can now refinance the property. He can get, let's say, a 90% of 195. So let's say that's 170. I don't know the exact number. So take 60,000 out of that, because I need the money I put up back plus my renovations back. That means that after closing, you're making about $100,000. Well, James Red borrowed about $1 million in real estate, or in mortgages. James Red borrowed $1 million. Brandon Green borrowed $1 million. David Silver borrowed $1 million. Lee Black borrowed $1 million. Well, so over the course of this starts happening in early 2002. And this is literally the first closing I had was like a month or so after I was sentenced to 3 years. So I mean, I'm literally sentenced to 3 years probation. I'm now a felon, and a month later, we did a house that was $150,000 or $160,000. I borrowed like $110,000 in a guy named, I want to say it was Brandon Green. So we borrowed we borrowed like $210,000. Or no, wait, it was I think it was 196. I think I borrowed $196,000. It's in my book. I have the exact numbers like in the book. I'm not going to find it. So it's like 190, 195, right around that. Borrowed $195,000 in Brandon Green, like within a month of me being sentenced. And then immediately turned around and borrowed money in another guy's name and another guy's name. And so now I ended up doing like 109 houses in Ybor City. That's what the FBI said I did. They said I borrowed in excess of $11.5 million in mortgages. And, and that, once again, listen, got caught all the time. I got caught one time by a bank. What was the name of that bank? South Star Bank. They actually caught me red-handed. Like they called the broker. They called the account executive. They called the broker. The broker came into my office and said, South Star Bank is calling. They're saying that this is fraud. I then call up the bank and talk to the owner of the bank, like the bank president and the head of their fraud department, which said he was ex FBI, and they sat there and they're they're saying, look, you don't even exist. Like I'm saying, I remember it was Alan Duncan. I said I was Alan Duncan. And they're going, you don't even exist, Mr. Duncan. This whole loan is fraud. The reason what had happened was that we were supposed to obviously start making a few payments. We never made the first payment on this particular one. I'd given money to everybody that was involved, and Rudy was supposed to make the first payment, and he never made the first payment. He was just an idiot. This is one of these guys who just can barely feed himself. Like he's a real estate agent, but he's just he's a fuck up. So very first payment, he never even made the first payment. So then I call up, and that sparked a whole investigation. And so I have to call them up, and I explain to them, look, let me just pay you the money back. And they were like, look, we're going to call the FBI, and we'll get our money back when we sell the property. And I was like, no, that's not true. And I had to explain to them that they thought they had lent like $150,000 on a piece of property that was worth $200,000. And once I explained to them that they'd lent $150,000 on a piece of property that was worth probably $30,000, maybe $50,000, they were about to lose a minimum they were going to lose was $100,000. Once I explained that to them, they were like, okay, wait a second, let's talk about this. Can you give us the money back? So they let me send them the money back. They still didn't call the FBI. We just had an agreement. We just agreed, I'll send you the money back if you promise not to, because keep in mind, if they call the FBI, I get caught, I got to pay them back anyway. So I was like, let me just send the money back. And they said, you send the money back, we'll consider this just a mistake, and it was a problem. And we won't contact anybody. We just want our money back. So I sent them back the $150,000. Loan was done. I mean it was a done deal. But I got caught. I got caught several times, and I always just paid them back and got away with it. So what's funny about this whole thing is that what I would do with these, the reason that most of the time I got away with it is this. Let's say I was Brandon Green. Brandon Green would borrow, let's say, roughly 5 or 6 loans. He'd get 5 or 6 mortgages, and he would, let's say, end up borrowing like $1 million. We'd walk away with, let's say, $600,000. Then we'd make a few payments, and we'd let those loans go into foreclosure. When those loans went into foreclosure, the banks would foreclose on the property. They'd then put the house back on the market, and then they'd sell the house, and they'd take the loss. They would assume, hey, we lent $150,000 or $180,000 on this house. We put it back on the market for $200,000. 3 months later, it didn't sell. We'd lower it to $150,000. 3 months later, it wouldn't sell. We'd lower it again to $100,000. By that point, somebody would make an offer for $60,000 or $70,000, and they'd sell it. And they'd go, "Hey, we just lost almost $100,000." But that happens, and they didn't think anything was wrong. The other thing was when they would start sending collection letters to the borrowers, I would then write a letter from my fictitious borrower's sister saying that, and I would type up, I would take an article from the newspaper, like a 30-car pile up on I-75 or something, and somebody was life flighted to Tampa General Hospital, and I would retype the article, and I would put my borrower's name in it. I'd print it out on newsprint, cardstock newsprint. And then I'd cut it out, and I'd make a copy of it. And then I'd highlight the name of the borrower that I'd put in the article. And I'd send a letter with that newspaper clipping with a letter from the borrower's sister saying that her brother had been in a catastrophic, accident and was life flighted to Tampa General Hospital, and he was currently in a coma, and that the doctors said, look, even if he wakes up from the coma, he'll never work again, and that the lender should just go ahead and foreclose on the property. They would stop sending letters. I gave them a reasonable explanation as to why this person wasn't making the payment anymore, and they accepted it. They'd then they'd foreclose, put the house back on the market, sell the house, take the loss, move on. I would also run up the credit cards of these guys. So once I'd loaded them up with debt, I'd then apply for a bunch of credit cards, get up $30,000, $20,000 or $30,000 in credit cards. I'd then go to the mall, run up the credit cards. So each one of these guys was worth, they'd end up with like $1 million and change in mortgages. They were $600,000, $700,000 profit. And then the banks would, they just cut their losses and move on. And it was a great scam. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I probably shouldn't say that, but it was a great scam, and it worked really well. I remember Rudy and I would go to the mall and run up the credit cards. And he would always be so nervous. Like we'd go buy like $1,000, $2,000 worth of clothes or whatever we were borrowing, whatever we were buying. We'd buy a couple $1,000s. We're buying Rolex watches and all kinds of just junk. And we're buying stuff. And we'd get up to the counter, and he would always get so scared. I'd pull out a credit card. He'd be like, huh. What are you doing? What do you mean, what am I doing? I'm using a credit card. That's what we're here for. It'd go, what if they notice? What if they call the police? How are they going to call the police? It's my credit card. Like, I am Brandon Green. I'm Brandon Green. I ordered the credit card. They sent it to me. I activated. I've been using it. Who's going to call the cops? There's no Brandon Green. And he just was, some people are just not, they're not psychologically prepared to commit fraud and be under that high anxiety. It wasn't even high anxiety because there was just no chance that they were even going to, even if they got a phone call. By that point, I was making my own IDs. So by that point, I'd figured out how to make my own IDs. By that point, I'm making fake IDs, and I'm going into the bank, and I'm actually opening up bank accounts. Hey, sorry for interrupting the video, but I want to let you guys know that if you join my Patreon at the top tier, every single month you get a different painting, and the contact information for my Patreon page is in the description. Back to the video. All right, so there was just no chance that anybody was going to think that there was fraud that had been committed. What was I going to tell you? Oh, bank account. Sorry. At this point, it's bank account. So I would go into, I was making fake IDs, and I would go in and I would open up bank accounts. So I'm opening up bank accounts using, like, I would give the ID to the person at the bank, and they would run my ID. There's a computer, or there was a program, I don't know if they still have it, in where they would actually generate what your Florida ID number should be. So I had the Florida ID number on my fake IDs. And I would go in, and because these guys don't exist, they don't have an ID. And I would actually be able to open up a bank account in the name of some fraudulent person. And what's so funny is that the fake IDs were not great. Like, they would grab them. It's funny because I actually had like I've had people look at them, like the FBI and stuff. They would look and they go, oh, they look really good. But they didn't. I didn't think they looked good, but to me they didn't look great, I didn't think. They looked good enough to fool people. So I'd give it to the bank. The bank would, sometimes they would actually take it and they would look at it like to see the hologram. Like, I would freak out. I was like, start sweating, like, oh my God. And they'd sit it down and they'd type in, they'd start the process of opening the bank account, and they would say, have you ever had a bank account before? Because nothing's coming up. And I'd say, oh no, I haven't had one in like, gosh, it was in my ex-wife's name, or, whatever it was. And they would open up a bank account for me. So I had bank accounts, I had credit cards, I had everything I needed to launder the money, and I had a foolproof scam. The only time, so one time this happened. This is funny. So what's funny about that is that I've got the appraisals are working, like the appraiser's working for me. I've got the whole thing set up where the appraisals are coming in solid. I've got my borrowers, which are solid, their credit solid, their employment solid, like everything's pretty solid. And the loans are going through, and then they're going into foreclosure. Nobody knows. This has been going on forever. Like, at this point, I'm probably at $10 or $11 million we brought in. I think by the end, the FBI ended up saying we did like $11.5 million. This scam netted me $11.5 million is what they said. Over 100 houses. Over the course of 18 months. So it seems like a lot of houses. But one time, this is funny. One time, and so many people knew what was going on. One time I had a guy named James Red that I was doing, this synthetic identity by the name of James Red. James Red had borrowed like 4 or 5 houses at this point. He'd borrowed $800,000-$900,000 in mortgages. But what we were doing is, once we put together a full package, we would run it through my old mortgage company. And we would close it at title companies where we knew the people at the title company. So I could show up at the title company and say, hey, listen, my guy isn't going to be able to be here for the closing. Can I drive the closing package out to him at his work and get him to sign? And the title people would let me do that. So I'd pick it up and I'd go sit in my car and I'd sign all the documents and I'd make a copy of his fake ID. And the pictures that I was using on the IDs, now some of them I would make a fake ID. If I was going to go use his credit cards, I'd put my picture on it. But typically, they were just pictures of people that I knew that had been arrested. So it was kind of a joke. So like, let's say it was some tenant that I knew that had lived in one of our places. So if it was some tenant I knew that had been arrested a few times, I'd go on the Hillsborough County arrest website and I'd pull his photo off and I'd use his photo on the ID. Well, one of the guys, so what was funny was, and then I'd put that on there and then I'd close the loan and I'd keep using his picture. And then when the whole thing was going to go under and I was going to run up his credit cards, I'd then switch the ID with my picture and I'd go in and run up his credit cards for 20 or 30 grand. And, I do everything. Like this chick I was dating named Jan, I remember I put like $1,000 worth of new tires on her truck. Or I would, you're paying for anything. Like somebody's like, hey, bro, I need new furniture. Can you put like $5,000 on a credit card? Sure, no problem. I mean, we all have everything we want. So it was a lot of fun. So what ended up happening was at one point, one of the title people figured out that one of the borrowers that I was closing loans with at her title company was fake. Somebody had called her and told her, hey, something's not right. Like, I think something's not right. Like, these people don't exist. I don't know what she knew or who told her. I never figured that out. But what happened was one day I got a phone call from a mortgage broker named Kelly Pruitt. And Kelly said, hey, listen, Mary at like Island Title or I think it was Paradise Title. At Paradise Title, Mary is saying that next time James Red does a closing with her, he has to show up. And she's like, we have a closing like in a couple of days. She's saying he has to show up. And she's like, she's got to know. And I was like, I mean, okay. And she's like, I mean, Matt, what are we going to do? I said, well, I mean, if he's got to show up, he's got to show up. Normally, Mary would just give me the package and let me have somebody and bring it to James Red. But I was like, look, if she's saying he's got to show up, he's got to show up. And she's like, how? I mean, he's like a fake, he's some paperwork and a fake ID. I said, no, it's okay. I said, I'll figure it out. So I actually called this guy named Eric Tamargo. And Eric comes in the office. I said, Eric, can you come in? And Eric used to clean all the yards for us. He would trim the trees, clean out the yards of these dumps that we were buying and make the outside look presentable. He owned like a landscaping company. So he shows up and he walks in. And I know Eric. I've known Eric for a while. I knew his ex-wife, his ex-wife back then. Her name was Amy. She was an account executive that used to come in for one of the lenders. And so that's how I knew him. And they got divorced. And he was, just kind of a derelict at the time. And he's doing cleaning yards and stuff. But he also had a drug problem. And so he comes in. And he's like, hey, man, what's going on, bro? Everything cool? I said, yeah, everything's cool. I said, look, Eric, I got to tell you something. And I said, can you sit down? He goes, sure. So he sits down. I said, look, all these houses we've been buying. And he goes, yeah. I said, well, let me tell you what we've been doing. We've been buying them for like $50,000, recording the value at this amount. Okay. I said, you know how an appraisal works. And I explained it to him. He's like, oh, okay. I go, then we have somebody buy those properties. The people that are buying the properties and refinancing those properties are fake people. And I explained to him about how I made the fake people. And he was like, holy shit, bro. I said, right. And then we make a few payments and we let him go into foreclosure. So we load the guy up with $1 million and then we just let him go into foreclosure. And he was like, oh my God, bro, that's what happens when the banks don't figure it out. Here's why. I explained that. He's like, man, this is brilliant. I said, right. I said, the problem is, Eric, usually I am able to just sign for these people. Okay. I said, well, this one title company, Paradise Title, they're having an issue and they want this guy, James Red, to show up. Okay. And I said, so I need somebody to go in there and sign for James Red. And I looked at him and he goes, well, man, who are you going to get to do that? And I went, well, I was thinking you, Eric. And he goes, me? Oh, I don't know. He goes, well, wait a minute. I can't do that. I go, what do you mean? He goes, you said you're using some scumbag's picture off the Hillsborough County website. You're using some guy's mugshot. They're going to know it's not me. And I go, well, here's the thing, Eric. I said, for James Red, I used the photo of you when you were arrested for domestic violence, when you slapped around your ex-wife and got arrested. You know how that's online. So I used that picture. So you are James Red. He goes, motherfucker. He stood up. He's like, you fucking piece of shit. I ought to beat your ass. And I was like, whoa. I was like, oh, Eric, just calm down. Listen. I go, the only reason I used your name was because I knew if it came to this point and somebody had to show up and sign for James Red, you were the only person I knew that had the balls to pull it off. And he looked at me. I mean, listen, it was such a bad salesman job on my part. And he looked at me and he goes, started shaking his head. He goes, yeah, you're right. You're right. And I said, bro, I know you can do this and, you can make this work. And he goes, yeah, bro, it's a big favor. He goes, oh, I'm not going to do it for nothing. I said, no, of course not, bro. Of course not. I mean, obviously I'm going to pay you. And I remember thinking if he asked for more than like 5 or 10 grand, I would just get an ID in my name and go to another title company and do it myself. But I didn't want my picture associated with this whole thing. So he sat there and he kind of rocked his head back and forth. I go, well, how much, Eric? And he goes, let me think about this. And he kind of thought about it for a little bit. And keep in mind, I've told him the numbers that we're borrowing. I've told him the numbers we're kind of making. And he goes, you guys are making a lot of money, bro. I said, well, wait a minute, Eric. I go, a lot of that money goes back in the property. There's not a ton of profit here. And he goes, all right. Kind of thinks. And I go, how much, Eric? And he goes, man, I want $500. Right? $500. And I literally almost started laughing. I had to I was like, I put my hand over my face and I was like, are you serious? 500? I mean, it was everything I did not to burst out laughing going, are you joking? And he goes, yeah, bro, it's a big favor, bro. And I said, no, it is, bro. I said, well, you got to sign before I give you that money. He's like, no, I get it. Yeah. Listen, I make a fake ID with his picture, right? Like he's got a fake ID, but I had to, it was all just cut and paste. I actually had to make a fake ID. A couple days later, we go into the title company. We walk in and I remember Mary comes out and she sees me sitting there and she goes, Mr. Cox, I don't know why you're here. I specifically told Kelly I'm not closing another one of these loans unless James Red shows up. And so Eric stands up and he goes, I'm James Red. And she looks at him and she goes, hold on a second, Mr. Red. And she goes and grabs one of the last files we closed, which had a picture of his old driver's license. And she pulls the picture out, and sure enough, it's a picture of him. So she sits there for a minute, and she goes, you could tell in her head she was thinking, like, how did I get this wrong? Like, that's the guy. That's James Red. And she goes, okay, well, Mr. Red, come on in. So we go in, and he signs the paperwork, and she starts handing out checks, like, here's $30,000 that goes to so-and-so. Here's $45,000 that goes here. Here's $10,000 that goes here. Here's $5,000 here. Here's $30,000. Like, she starts giving me all these checks, and I'm like, okay, thanks, because I'm supposed to distribute the checks. And I go, okay, thanks, Mary. And we leave. Eric sees the checks. So we get in the car and I start giving him counting out $500. He's like, yeah, bro, you guys made a lot of money. And I go, whoa. I said, bro, you said 500. And on top of that, a lot of that money goes back into the scam. Yeah, you're right. All right, that's cool. So I give him the money. Like a week later, I call him back. I got another closing. I said, Eric, I need you to do another closing for me. Yo, bro. He's like, I've been thinking about that. You made a lot of money, bro. I'm not doing it for no $500. Nah, you made a ton of money, man. I'm not doing it for $500 this time. I said, no, I totally get it, Eric. How much? Let me know what the price is. I get it. 500. If you want more than 500, just let me know. And he goes, yeah, let me think about this. Yeah. I said, how much, bro? How much? He goes, yeah, man, I want $1,000. $1,000. I mean, he saw me walk away with like 70 or 80 grand. He wants $1,000. I was like, dang, well, you got to do it for, no, I'll do it first. Sure enough, we meet again. He goes in. He signs for $1,000. He signs the whole thing. He comes back, gets in my car. I give him $1,000. Listen, like a couple months later, like a month and a half later, I only ever signed for one loan ever. And that was also a James Red loan. I borrowed from SunTrust Bank. I borrowed $250,000 from SunTrust Bank. Walked in, fake ID. That's the only time I ever showed up anywhere, ever signed anything with SunTrust Bank. SunTrust Bank. $250,000. Other than that, Eric signed for James Red. And nobody signed for anybody else. I signed for everybody. I mean, nobody ever showed up for a closing ever. Oh my God, bro. I remember one time there was a girl named Kim. I went and picked up a package for Kim one time. So I pick up the package. I remember I walked to bring it to my borrower to sign. I walked around the building, got in my car, which was parked right next to the building, right next to all these windows. I sat down, I signed for the guy, I listened to the radio, I make a few phone calls. I wait about 45 minutes in my car. Finally, I get up and I put the picture of the guy's ID on the front of the file. I walk back in and I remember I handed it to her. And she goes, that was Joel Cologne, by the way. The guy's name was Joel Cologne. I hand her the file. She walks in. I remember she picked it up. She looked at it. She flipped through it. She looked at me and she goes, I like the way you put the picture of his ID right on the front. And I went, okay. And I remember thinking, that was weird. This is weird. And I went, okay, well, yeah. And she goes, yeah. She said, have I shown you my office, Matt? And I went, no. And she goes, come take a look at my office. And so I walk in the back, and I walk over and walk in the back of her office. And the window to her office, on the other side of the window in the parking lot, is my car. And she said, I've sat here for the past 45 minutes watching you sign documents. She goes, you listened to the radio a little bit. You made some calls. She goes, but you did not drive to this guy's office. And she goes, and Joel Cologne did not sign these documents. And I was like, fuck. And she goes, what's going on? I said, listen. I said, Amy, the guy told me to sign for him. He's busy. I actually have a power of attorney for him. But the company, the lender we were going through would not allow a power of attorney. So I had to sign. Somebody has to sign for him. I can't. He's like, I forget what I said. He's 2 hours away, or he's out of the state, or I forget what it was. I said, it's not a big deal. She goes, well, I can't give you the checks. I mean, I got to notarize this. So I'm supposed to notarize. I said, look, his signature is identical. I said, here's his original statement. Like, I start showing her pictures, and she's like, okay, I agree. You've got his signature down, but I need to talk to him. And I was like, hold on. I'll call him right now. So I call his phone number. And it rings and it rings and goes to voicemail. He doesn't answer, obviously. It goes. Sorry, I'm sorry. She called him. That's wrong. She called him, and it rang and went to voicemail. And I know it went to voicemail, obviously, because his cell phone was sitting in my car on the other side of the window. And she called and left a message, and called back and left a message. And I go, look, and she goes, look, if I don't talk to this guy, I'm not letting you leave. Like, I'm not notarizing these things. And I went, shoot. I go, hold on. And I grab her phone. And I go, what's the number? She gives me the number, and I punch in my business partner's phone number, Dave Walker. And I answer the phone, and I go, hey, Joel, this is Matt. And he goes, oh, Christ, what am I, Joel here? And I said, yeah, I said, yes, sir. And he goes, okay, all right, what's going on? I said, so listen, I'm at the title company. I go, Kim is here, and she let me sign and everything, and I told her about the power of attorney, but the problem is she wants to talk to you to make sure it's okay that I sign, because she has to notarize it. She wants to make sure that you okay it. And he goes, oh, Christ. He goes, put her on the phone. So I go, here's Joel. And she grabs the phone, and she's like, hey, Mr. Cologne, I just want to let you know, I'm at Kim's Goldsboro, and Mr. Cox explained the situation, but you have to understand that I'm notarizing these, and I need to make sure that everything's okay. He's like, yeah, it's fine. I told him I actually signed a power of attorney, but he said there's some issue with the bank. And she's like, no problem. Okay, thank you. So I can notarize your signature. No problem. Still totally not right, by the way. She still shouldn't have done it. But she hung up the phone, notarized everything, gave me the fucking checks, and I left. Like, I mean, it's so ridiculous the amount. Listen, and this is the thing. Like, I could go on and on, and how many times I got caught and just got away with it. Hit the like button, hit the notification bell, leave a comment, and check out the hold tight and check out the next video. And see you.